let me just say, so I would say I disagree both on the strategy of touting the Cheney's endorsement and the substance of touting the Cheney's endorsement. I can come back to that in a little bit, but first, let me ask you, and answers from both of you would be good. We can start with Hutch, but what would you say so far in the campaign that Kamala has done which is right, and what has she done that's wrong?
For me, the selection of Tim Walz, I was just going to say, for me, the selection of Tim Walz is huge because I've also been a big fan of Governor Walz long before the campaign. When he was like occasionally going out, he's not a high-profile Democratic governor, at least prior to this, the way that Gavin Newsom is, the way that Gretchen Whitmer is. But he would occasionally go on MSNBC and do the stump and make speeches. And when I look deeper into his record and what he was able to do with a single vote in the upper chamber of the Minnesota legislature, it's remarkable. This is a man who understands how to leverage power. And so for me, that is by far the most important thing that she's done. The fact that she went with somebody who doesn't have the name recognition or the profile and isn't the governor of a swing state as crucial as Pennsylvania, the way Governor Shapiro is, but somebody who's like, hey, listen, when I have majorities, I wield those majorities. I will push through my agenda. If Republicans want to get on board, that's great, but I will not let them cock-block me. I love that, and that just got my heart a little pitter-pattering. So I think that is by far the best thing that she has done. In terms of what she has done wrong, I don't know. I feel like, even the things that she's done wrong, like her reluctance to distance herself from President Biden, I understand some of the hesitation they're giving that he is the sitting president. I would probably say, I don't know. I would probably maybe the quote unquote embrace of Dick Cheney, or perhaps not having a pro-Palestinian speaker at the DNC. But I think these things, in the grand scheme of things, are relatively minor errors of the Harris campaign, and they certainly pale in comparison to what she's done right, in my opinion.
Hutch, what would you say she's done right and wrong?
I totally agree with Josiah about picking Tim Walz. I think I would have been fine if she picked Shapiro. There were some tactical reasons for why that would have been a sound decision, but Walz, I think, added something to her campaign that she really needed, this sort of like relatability. And in my opinion, he's been pretty fantastic. I actually think that her catering her message to the center is really smart in this climate right now. So I would praise her for that, for using rhetoric that might appeal to Nikki Haley primary voters, centrist, moderate Republicans, old school Republicans in states like Arizona, which may prove to be a crucial state. On the bad side, I guess the biggest criticism that I would have for her is that I think she probably should have had a more aggressive media schedule earlier on, though I do understand that she had very little time to cobble a campaign together. And so there's going to be a lot of like logistical things that you work out in the beginning, like who do you staff your campaign with, and sort of ironing out what your platform's going to be, what your messaging is going to be. I'm happy to see that she's going on a lot of alternative media podcasts right now. I think that was really smart that she went on Fox News. I think the idea of her going on Rogan is a little bit scary, but honestly, to me, she proved that she can, last night with her interview with Bret Baier, that she can handle those kinds of tough questions. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I wish she would have started doing that like 3 weeks ago. Yeah.
Chris, so what do you think? What do you think she's done right and wrong? I'm curious your answer as well.
First of all, something that you all will find enjoyable. I just saw this headline from right-wing media outlet PJ Media. Did Kamala's Fox News meltdown just end her campaign?
They wish, man. They wish that was the case.
She did. I think she did a great job on that. But go ahead, Crystal.
Yeah. So my issue. Listen, I understand, and I'm open to the strategy of embracing Republicans, having them on the DNC stage, basically, leaning into this idea of we have a broad anti-Trump coalition, and look at even these reasonable Republicans who served with Trump, who previously supported him, like they're in our camp now. But I don't think you can do that alone. And I also think they've leaned too hard into that strategy. Embracing Dick Cheney and thanking him for his service would be a perfect example of leaning too hard in that direction, both from a moral standpoint, because Dick Cheney is, I think, one of the most evil and nefarious wrongdoers in American politics, certainly in modern history, but also from a tactical perspective. Like, Dick Cheney left office with a 13% approval rating. Liz Cheney is similarly not particularly popular. So I'm not sure that they are getting as much out of it tactically as they think they are. But my bigger beef is the fact that they haven't paired that with leaning into a consistent messaging on bread and butter issues. You know, I was also extremely excited when she picked Tim Walz because I thought, here's a guy that's got like a ready-made agenda that he actually passed in the state of Minnesota, and she can just rip that off. Like, just, I'm going to do what Tim did there. We're going to pass paid family leave. We're going to make sure people can, you know, go to free public college. We're going to do tax breaks for the working class. Like, it was all free school lunch, free school breakfast. It was all sort of there for. And I'm not saying that she hasn't had policy plans and that they don't talk about it, but there isn't this consistent, overwhelming, you know, these are the three things she's going to say every time she opens her mouth. And those are things that are, yes, I think they're progressive, but they're also centrist in that they are the center of American economic opinion. So to me, the problem isn't that she has this, like, let me brag about the Republicans that support me strategy. It's leaning too heavily on that. The endorsement from Dick Cheney is just unacceptable in general, but leaning too heavily into that without also countering it with, you know, things that would get young people, working class people, more excited about her campaign. And then obviously, to me, the biggest just outrageous moral failure is continuing to back a genocidal policy in Gaza and not even really giving any sense that there's any distance whatsoever between herself and Joe Biden, which, you know, I believe that they think is a smart tactical decision. I think it's a disastrous tactical decision, but the more important thing is it's utterly, you know, disgusting morally.
So let me give my answer then, and we'll get your guys' reaction, because I thought a lot about this. What has she done that's good? What has she done that's bad? Let me start with the good. First, let me sign off on everything you guys said about Tim Walz. Totally agree with that. That got me genuinely excited about Kamala. Like, I was genuinely, like, giddy the day that she picked Tim Walz. Yeah, because I know his record is phenomenal. So I love that. I loved when they came out of the gate with the weird stuff. The weird stuff took off like wildfire, and it all stemmed from a shoot-from-the-hip comment from Tim Walz in an interview, and it just took off like wildfire. It was great. I love the we're not going back stuff. People were chanting that at rallies endlessly. I love that they're embracing freedom, and they bring that up all the time. I love how they've basically stolen patriotism from the Republicans. I think that's great. Just recently, they both started using the F word about Donald Trump, fascist, and they cite General Mark Milley calling him that, and they say, look, the general said it. Well, what do you want me to say? It's true. He's saying it. I love that. I love the $6,000 child tax credit. I love the 3 million new homes. I love the policy where Medicare is going to cover home care. I think it's a crime that the media didn't talk about that more, and she's out there touting it, and good on her for doing that. I love that in this the Fox interview. I love that. I think she did a great job. She hit Trump on getting out of the Iran deal. I thought that was great. The bad stuff is as follows, in my opinion. There was reporting that the Biden team kind of talked her off of the weird framing and the we're not going back framing. They changed we're not going back to turn the page or something like that. It's just not popping as much as we're not going back. So that's just a little messaging thing there that I have issue with. I loved when she came out of the gates talking about the ban on price gouging, because it's great politics, because then you baited the Republicans into calling you a communist, and then they had to go out there and functionally they were defending price gouging. And there's like 39 states in the country that have bans on price gouging if there's like a natural disaster or something like that. She looked incredibly populist and incredibly anti-establishment, and Donald Trump and the Republicans were taking the mantle of, no, we're going to defend the establishment and we're going to defend Americans getting ripped off. So I love that, but she backed off of the ban on the price gouging thing after there was a lot of, you know, noise around that. She didn't have the answer for the question. I believe you alluded to this, Josiah. She didn't have an answer for the question, how are you different than Joe Biden, the first 2 times she was asked that. I think that's bad. I really dislike the saying that Iran is our biggest enemy. That just came out recently. And that is kind of the fear with like touting the Liz Cheney and the Dick Cheney stuff is like, well, how much of this do you, like some foreign policy stuff, do you kind of agree with them on? Because the Iran thing, I don't like at all. Not saying Trump's good on Iran. He's actually, I think, worse on Iran, but that's neither here nor there. And to Crystal's point, leaning too much into the Cheneys supporting her, I think it's strategically wrong, and I think it's morally wrong. I'm okay with her saying, like, Liz Cheney endorsed me. What I have a problem with is doing a big event where you, like, brag about it and saying the thing about thank you for your service to Dick Cheney. And as evidence of my theory, I would, and this, you know, earlier in the week, I was very down on the campaign, and the reason was there was a new slate of polls that came out, and it looked like she dropped about 2 points, and this came right on the heels of all of, like, the Cheney stuff.
Cheney
I'm not saying it's exclusively the fault of the Cheney stuff, but I think it's just this this broader trend that I was afraid of. Now, she has course corrected since then a little bit with this Fox News interview, which I think was great. But the point is, Liz Cheney, as you pointed out, 93% voting with Trump. Dick Cheney had a 13% approval rating, as you pointed out, lied us into the Iraq war, ordered illegal torture, ordered illegal spying, got rid of due process and habeas corpus, took $44 million from Halliburton and gave them no bid contracts afterwards, had Guantanamo Bay, expanded the doctrine of unitary executive theory, which is the thing that we all are like, no, Trump wants to expand unitary executive theory. Dick Cheney did that. So the problem is, and then I'll turn it over to you guys. I'm sorry, I know I've been going for a long time here.
No, go ahead.
So it's strategically bad, and I think it's substantively bad because Dick Cheney I view as Trump before Trump. And the larger issue is what I worry about Democrats, and this happened with Hillary in 2016, is you end up appealing to Republicans in the general election. Okay. But you over appeal to Republicans while Republicans appeal to their base. So I guess the point is, stop taking your base for granted like Hillary. I think they should care more about Arab Americans and Muslim Americans and Lebanese Americans, particularly in Michigan. This is a demographic that they should be winning by massive numbers, and care more about young voters and just give less attention to Dick Cheney. Finally, the thing I would do to check this box of try to get Republican votes, go to, like, you know how Trump made a big deal about saving the carrier factory and then they ship the jobs overseas anyway. You go take some people from the carrier factory who lost their jobs and they're Republicans, and you do an event with them, and they say, hey, I voted for Donald Trump, but he stabbed us in the back, and I lost my job. And 200,000 manufacturing jobs were outsourced under Trump. That's the way of, like, appealing to working-class Republicans as opposed to taking elitist war criminal Republicans who nobody likes and running around the country with them. I'm sorry for how long that was. Hutch, I'll let you respond first since you did the video, and then Josiah will get your reaction.
Yeah.
Well, you brought up Liz Cheney's favorability ratings by the time she left office. The reason why her favorability ratings were so low is because she made the decision to essentially willingly sacrifice her political career to go after Trump.
I didn't bring that up. I brought up Dick Cheney's, not Liz. Liz, I didn't bring up her favorability.
You know, I'm not sure how much I would push back against the Dick Cheney thing. I think Josiah and I both probably agree that maybe she used a little too soft language with that, like saying she was like thanking him for his service. I think is probably a little bit too far.
Too far on because you don't think it's tactically sound, or because you don't think it's morally sound, since you would accept Satan's endorsement if you thought it moved some votes.
Well, maybe both. Maybe I was being a bit hyperbolic when I said I would accept Satan's, but
he's actually worse than Satan. That's the point.
Sure. I mean, I feel like wasn't there a quote from who's the actor that played him in the movie? I think he said he took inspiration from Satan when he was trying to.
Oh.
Yeah, right. So yeah, but going back to what you were saying about like how she should be differing herself from Biden, there was a part in a video that you made recently where you said one of the ways that you would differ yourself from Biden would be that you would say that you would have gone about Build Back Better differently, and you would have forced Joe Manchin to just go along with this piece of legislation. This is one of the big sticking points that I have with probably both of you guys. What does that look like when you say you're going to force Joe Manchin to sign on to legislation? Because when I look at every single president is going to be constrained by the Congress that they have. Even LBJ and FDR, who had absurd majorities in comparison to what Biden was working with in 2021. He had a 50-50 Senate, and what do we have, like an 8-seat majority in the House? And so you basically need perfect unanimity in the party if you want to pass any part of your agenda. I look at his legislative track record, and I'm impressed. Like, to me, Joe Biden has been the most successful president legislatively in the modern era, and it's
I agree.
Not even
domestically, I agree.
Particularly close. So yeah, I guess I would want to press you guys on, or press you, Kyle, specifically when you say you would force Joe Manchin to just sign on to Build Back Better. What does that actually look like in practice?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that question. That's a phenomenal question. So it's basically the carrot and stick approach. So you mentioned LBJ there, you mentioned FDR there. Yes, they had big majorities, but they also knew how to play politics in a way that modern day Democrats in the neoliberal era, I don't think they play politics nearly as well. So for example, Joe Manchin's daughter is a pharmaceutical criminal, and she's in part responsible for jacking up, what is it, the insulin prices colossally?
Don't remember.
I don't know if it was insulin or something else, but
I think it was insulin.
There was reporting on how his daughter is basically a pharma criminal. And for somebody like Joe Manchin, or for somebody like Kyrsten Sinema, basically if you're president, you use the bully pulpit a little bit, you call them into your office and you say, look, you're a Democrat, you could be a hero and they'll build statues to you, or you'll be my biggest enemy. And so you get to choose. If you don't vote with Build Back Better, then the Democratic Party is going to use all of our resources to fund a primary opponent against you to try to take you out. Or if you do the right thing, like I said, they'll build statues to you. So use this. I mean, this is what politics always has been, right? There's a lot of ugly stuff that goes on behind closed doors. But if you're doing tactical stuff behind closed doors that ends up getting the American people colossal wins that they need, like Build Back Better, which I think was a phenomenal piece of legislation, I think that's how you do it. And I'm not saying it would have worked, because I don't know if it would have worked. But what I'm saying is it would have been the right path to at least get maybe more, as opposed to we got the Inflation Reduction Act, which was good, but it was what, maybe 20% of what was in the original Build Back Better. So I just don't see that Biden and modern day Democrats, Obama, Clinton, they don't have the same sort of commitment to social democracy as, say, FDR had. And so they don't want to play that dirty game of politics behind the scenes. Whereas when you look on the Republican side, I think Trump does use the bully pulpit. He does use the carrot or the stick. He just uses it for really, really bad things, which we hate.
Can I just offer one other example
Sure.
that I think is a little more clear cut than, because you're right, Build Back, he could have promised Joe Manchin, like, I'm going to pave West Virginia in gold and you're going to be a hero. And, if you don't go with us, like, he could have used that approach, and there's no guarantees that it would have worked because of who Joe Manchin is and his, political realities and whatever. There's no guarantees. But you also had a situation where they were trying to push through a $15 minimum wage increase. And they went to the parliamentarian and said, can we do this? And parliamentarian is not an elected official. There's nothing in the law that says you have to, that the decisions of the parliamentarian, which are really just meant to be guidance, are binding. What's more, you can hire a new parliamentarian at any time.
That's what Bush did.
And instead, they're just like, no, they said no, so I guess we can't do it.
I'd like to respond to this if I may, because
Yeah,
Hutch actually
Sure,
changed
go
my
ahead.
mind on one of these things. So just again, full disclosure, I'm totally sympathetic. If you look at my Twitter feed or my YouTube videos, one of the things I advocate for is a more ruthless Democratic Party. It's one of the reasons why, again, I am so impressed by the selection of Governor Tim Walz, because again, this is a person who leverages power despite razor-thin majorities.
Correct.
If you have power and you're dealing with a minority opposition, you should do everything that is tactically feasible to push through your agenda. And I do think that Democrats sometimes struggle with that posture. Attorney General Merrick Garland, to me, is a classic example of a guy who, this was an appeal to bipartisanship. He was a successful prosecutor back in the day. He was a centrist judge, President Obama's Supreme Court nominee. And I almost like as a mulligan or a consolation prize, like, hey, we couldn't make you a Supreme Court justice, we'll make you an attorney general. I think he's a very intelligent man. I think in many ways he's been a disastrous attorney general because he has been so lethargic. He's quick to prosecute and investigate Democrats. He drags his feet when it comes to Donald Trump. So this to me is just a great example. However, I do think that the realities of the 50-50 split Senate would make it extremely difficult and very dangerous for President Biden to have put the sort of pressure on Joe Manchin that you talk about. So Joe Manchin being a very conservative Democrat in a state that is effectively unwinnable for the Democrats, there's no way that a Democrat's going to win West Virginia outside of Joe Manchin. I think that had President Biden done what you suggested, Kyle, it would have been very easy for Joe Manchin to say, you know what, fuck you. I'm going to switch parties. I'm either going to become an independent who may caucus with the Republicans, or I may just go ahead and switch parties and become a Republican anyway. And he actually probably would have increased his likelihood of winning re-election should he, if he had chosen to run for a second term. Kyrsten Sinema is more vulnerable, so I'm more sympathetic to the carrot and stick approach with her since Arizona is a purple state. But it's not just that there's a risk of it not working. There's a risk of it backfiring spectacularly. And the only other thing I'll just say real quick to Crystal's point about the parliamentarian is I agree. President Biden could have pressured Chuck Schumer to fire the parliamentarian. That could have been done. But this is where actually Hutch persuaded me. He changed my mind on this because he pointed out that, if I remember correctly, Sinema and Manchin both opposed the $15 bill or provision in the bill. So even if they'd gotten it included in the bill, that probably just would have killed the bill. So sorry for, that's my spiel.
Go ahead, Hutch.
People bring up.
Go ahead, Hutch.
People bring up the
parliament.
Right. People bring up the parliamentarian as though it's an example of fecklessness, and to me, it's just an example of just pretty basic logic. Like it wouldn't have mattered if it fired the parliamentarian, Because, yeah, to Josiah's point, he's absolutely right. Both Sinema and Manchin, as far as I'm aware, were on the record against the $15 an hour minimum wage. And I have a sense that they probably wouldn't have been the only ones. Like, there might have been like 3 or 4 other Democratic senators who were not open about it, who might have voted against that $15 an hour minimum wage. When you talk about Joe Manchin's daughter in the bully pulpit, I don't really know what that means. It sounds like what you're saying is that Joe Biden should have
open a criminal investigation. Open a criminal investigation. If you don't vote for Build Back Better, we're going to open a criminal investigation because she objectively is a criminal, not because it's bullshit and she's not a criminal. Like, I'm not saying do a fake investigation. I'm saying do a real investigation. Who is supposed to make that threat?
Who is supposed to make that threat?
Joe Biden, anybody in the administration, be very direct with them. Say, look, like I said, you'll be a hero or you'll be our biggest enemy. And it's not like the daughter isn't a criminal. I mean, I think she should be prosecuted anyway, but I'd be willing to not prosecute if Joe Manchin's vote comes on for either Build Back Better or at least a piece of legislation that is stronger than what the IRA ended up being.
Well, here's how I see that playing out. Joe Biden invites Joe Manchin into the Oval Office and says, and listen, if you don't sign on to this Build Back Better as is, I'm going to sick Merrick Garland on your daughter. First of all, and if he actually relayed that plan to Merrick Garland, first of all, I think Merrick Garland would have resigned immediately and gone to the press and said, I cannot serve under a corrupt administration who would sick the DOJ on a political opponent to try to whip votes for a piece of legislation that I like. And I think to Josiah's point, Joe Manchin would have immediately switched to either independent or Republican, and then there goes your majority, and you don't get any legislation done whatsoever.
But I don't know why that's corrupt.
This idea, it's corrupt. We have longstanding norms to keep the DOJ separate from politics. The president is never supposed to be able to just sick the DOJ on whoever they want. Donald Trump did it openly in the final month. I mean, he did it openly during his entire presidency, but he did it openly in the final month of the 2020 election. He was publicly pressuring Bill Barr to go after Joe Biden, and we called it corrupt at the time because it is. The president is not supposed to, and they shouldn't be allowed to use the DOJ to pressure some kind of like political outcome. This is like a big disagreement that you and I have. I don't think that this is a reasonable proposition.
Well, let me ask you this.
I think he would have been impeached. I think Biden would have been impeached by his own party. He would have done something like that.
Apart from the strategy tied to Build Back Better, do you think Joe Manchin's daughter should be prosecuted anyway?
I'm not familiar with the case, but if she is like breaking the law or whatever, of course. I mean, I would support anybody who is doing any kind of like, what did you say she was involved with? Like it's some kind of pharma thing?
Involved with, she works for a pharmaceutical company, and she was involved in jacking the price of insulin. But even beyond that, if you take Kyrsten Sinema, for example, there were articles coming out about how she took, I forget the exact number, it was either $1 million or $2 million from pharma lobbyists. And at that exact time, she flipped her vote and was against lowering all the drug prices. They ended up getting a compromise where they ended up lowering, I believe it was 10 drug prices and then more over time. But so my point is, that's an example of like brazen corruption, but technically it's legal. So to have a president basically call that out and say, we're not going to stand for it, and we're going to use hard politics behind the scenes to try to get good things done for the American people, I don't view that as corrupt. I view that as a competent president fighting for the American people. And I think that's the core of our disagreement, because if you look at, say, like the filibuster, for example, I think the filibuster is kind of absurd. I'd be okay with going back to the original filibuster where you actually have to filibuster, like you have to talk. But now
where
they
the burden is actually on the filibustering party and not something where they can just kick back.
Now they just say, I'm invoking the filibuster and you need 60 votes to get it through. So even with something, to your point about like, oh, you know, I don't think it's fecklessness, the parliamentarian thing. Well, then it's definitely fecklessness to not at least have more exceptions to the filibuster or go back to the original filibuster, because there's already 161 exceptions to the filibuster. Why not add more for specific policies? Like Kamala came out to her credit the other day and said we'd get rid of the filibuster for Roe v. Wade. I don't know why you just stop there. You're arbitrarily handcuffing yourself. And if the argument is, well, down the road, Republicans will use 51 votes to get bad things, and it's like, okay, and then they'll lose the election and you get back in there and you do good things again. So I think the filibuster is undemocratic and we should nuke the filibuster. And so I don't view these things as like corrupt on behalf of Biden if he were to fight for these things. I view it as like, that's what I want from a president. FDR threatened to pack the Supreme Court. And just because of the threat, the Republicans backed down and voted to keep, what was it?
but his own Congress said no. But going back to your point there, it's difficult for me to wrap my head around this idea that threatening to wield the DOJ as your personal political tool, like you can't, it's difficult for me to understand. You can't see how that could backfire if all of a sudden this became the new norm, because there's no laws technically.
Well, you already said Republicans are already doing it. To determine whether or not, yeah, but they get bad press for that. Like that, Donald Trump was the first one-term president since 1992. He was the most ineffective president in terms of legislation in modern history. He got the tax cuts done. That's the only thing he got done. Yeah, so this idea that him being,
but I guess the point
is
did
that corrupt pressure actually help him with his legislative agenda? I would say I would argue the opposite.
We're sort of obsessing over this one example Kyle gave about the daughter. But I think the broader point is that there did not really seem to be any efforts to twist Joe Manchin's arm. Or to even offer like, hey, what do you want in West Virginia? Like, I'm not above that kind of like favor trading also. Give him the equivalent of the Cornhusker kickback or whatever. It seemed like there was much more willingness to just accept defeat.
Well, they're against it. Okay.
He's against it. The parliamentarians against it. I guess we just can't do these things. And, you know, it speaks to the broader, I think, kind of philosophical or tactical disagreements that that we may have with you both, which is like, it seems like whenever it comes to that economically beneficial, progressive, or as I said before, it's really a centrist agenda, it seems like there's a lot more quit on that side of the ledger versus the embracing of a Dick Cheney or a Liz Cheney. And, you know, to get back to that debate, one thing I wanted to ask about on the tactical soundness is, obviously, Michigan is one of the most key states in terms of Kamala's likely political, path to 270. It probably runs through Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And there is a significant Arab American voting bloc in Michigan. And there's polling that suggests that a majority of them are actually going to vote for Jill Stein. You can tell Democrats are concerned about this because they're running now anti-Jill Stein ads. I cannot think that it helps their case when these voters are looking at the fact that you didn't have room for even a pro-Kamala Palestinian American speaker on the DNC stage, but somehow you have room for Dick Cheney in your party.
So again, I just want to say, as somebody who brought that up at the beginning, I totally believe, I mean, it's easy for me to armchair quarterback, but looking back on, I do think that was a colossal mistake by Vice President Harris, given the inclusivity of the DNC. And I was there. I mean, it was a totally wide range to not have, and I'm blanking on her name, but she was a state representative, I think from Georgia.
Yeah.
Yes, who was going to endorse the vice president and pro-Palestinian. I think that was a colossal error, 100%, and it almost undermined the inclusivity argument. But going back to the Cheney thing versus Michigan, I want to be very clear, and I don't want to speak for Hutch, but knowing him as I do, I'm confident he would agree with this. If you were able to produce polling which said, listen, yeah, Harris's approval rating or support among Republicans has gone from 5 to, I think, 9, according to the last New York Times Siena poll. But she's lost 15%, like in the same time, or like she's lost an equal or comparable or greater amount from liberals and otherwise people who are inclined to vote for her as a consequence of that. Then I think we'd all agree, well, then screw the Cheneys, jettison. We should always, if given a binary choice, I think we should just lean left more towards trying to appeal to the right. But I think Hutch's position, and this is where I feel, unless I can get evidence to the contrary, that accepting the endorsement of Liz Cheney, I just don't think, or have not seen data, that that's going to cost votes from the left flank. I can't imagine somebody's going to be like, hell yeah, I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. She's accepted Tim Walz. But you know what? She said something nice about Liz Cheney, so I'm going to vote third party. I've just not seen any evidence.
Yeah, it's not the specific, you're right. It's not that specific thing. It's evidence of a potential broader trend which could be damaging.
Well, but I actually think there is evidence of this specific thing, which, obviously.
That she dropped 2 points right when she did it?
Yeah, it's difficult to pinpoint, but she was doing better in the polls before she leaned hard into the Cheney world, both Liz and Dick. When she was bringing Tim Walz on board, when she was announcing her price gouging proposal, when she was getting attacked as a communist for daring to stand up to companies that are, ripping off American consumers, that's when she was doing her best. And so the slippage hasn't been massive, But given that it's a very closely divided country, it is significant and something we shouldn't ignore. And so now you're much more at like a 50-50 likelihood of success post Cheney world, embrace, versus previously it was more like a 60-40. And again, those things are significant. I'm not saying it's 100% determinative, but you do have to look at what she was doing in the campaign when it was succeeding at its highest levels versus how they're doing at this point.
So I agree. I agree with you, but I also think she has, since then, she's also saved it a little bit more. Like they've gotten better within the past few days because they're calling him a fascist and because she did the Fox News interview. But I agree with you that initially when it looked like that was going to be the trajectory, which is a very Hillary 2016 type trajectory, I was like, oh no, they're going to do it again. But let me ask you guys, because this is my grand theory, and I call this the Goldilocks zone for campaigning. I'm curious what both of you think of it. So to me, I actually like the idea of Kamala self-branding. I'm a centrist. I'm a moderate. Say those words and say it in every single interview. I actually love that. But I want her to pair it with saying, I'm a centrist. That's why I want to do free school breakfast and lunch for kids like Tim Walz did in Minnesota. I'm a centrist. I want 12 weeks paid family leave and 12 weeks paid sick leave. So make that the centrist position and then run with it. And then it becomes like, it's a branding thing. People be like, oh, Kamala, yeah, she's a centrist, right? But they associate that with good. Exactly. So what do you guys think of that?
I mean, I take your point. I mean, I feel like paid family leave has like 80% approval with the public.
It's about that, yeah.
Yeah, child tax credit, 70%. All those things are very popular.
Right. The difficult thing with public opinion polls for specific policies is that it doesn't necessarily indicate like, okay, it's going to be like 80% easy to get it done, because we all know that
obviously,
in the Congress, with the way that everything's set up, the Republicans have these institutional advantages, and it's just really hard to get popular policy over the finish line. I lost my train of thought there. Josiah, you want to jump in there?
Well, no, I was going to say, so it's funny. I'm reminded of what Governor Walz said recently. It was like, one man's socialism is another man's neighborliness. And he got grilled on this, or at least she attempted to do so, Shannon Bream on Fox News. So she's like, this is the dictionary definition of socialist. So is this what you're getting at? And he's like, no, it's just that Donald Trump refers to anything Democrats ever tried to do ever as socialism.
Yeah,
and I'm saying
that really well.
Right, exactly. I'm saying that lazy, lax definition just refers to basic common sense things.
Let me.
Sorry,
I was just gonna say real quick,
okay,
as far as like the moderate thing, I'm not the person to ask on this, Kyle, because when I hear the word centrist, I get triggered immensely because I have enormous contempt for it. But you're right. I mean, there is obviously an appeal to that, and maybe a branding campaign, just like she's trying to do with patriotism. This idea that patriotism is actually a liberal or progressive value because we love our country enough to recognize that it has issues that we need to fix, whereas Republicans and this cult of personality, they don't love America. They love Donald Trump and would gleefully sell this country and all of its constituents down the river. So there may be some utility in what you're talking about.
Go ahead, Josiah.
I also want to say that there's a little bit of it's a tricky situation with politics right now, and in terms of like what you run on for your legislative agenda, because I feel like you're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Like typically in this country, politicians will run on their agenda, and oftentimes it'll be a very ambitious agenda that maybe they even know they're likely not going to be able to get from the Congress that's elected that next session. So we heard, I feel like Joe Biden has got a lot of criticism for promising a $15 an hour minimum wage, and that didn't happen. Promising like more student loan debt, that didn't happen because of the Supreme Court and other factors. And so, if you run on I feel like if she gets a 50-50 Senate, which it looks like that's probably the best that we can get, and that even that's kind of a long shot right now. The Senate's not looking great. I feel like she's taking a different approach of actually trying to promise policies that seem realistic in their ability to get done. Like if she was running on Medicare for all right now, it might get a lot of like young progressives excited, but there would be no way for I think all of us would probably agree, there would be no way that would pass in the next Congress. And so it seems to be a different strategy that like Biden took with over promising. She seems to be going a more realistic route. I personally kind of appreciate that honesty, and I'm curious what you guys have to say about that.
She is running on getting rid of medical debt. That was one of the original things that she proposed in that first list that she put out. And there are Democratic governors across the country who are buying up medical debt for everybody in their state for pennies on the dollar, and then they're wiping it out. And like that's the kind of stuff I love to see, and that's something that she rolled out. Now, I would like to see her talk about that more, but to me, I almost have a slight disagreement in the sense that I think she's being a little more ambitious than you're giving her credit for. I think the $6,000 child tax credit is super ambitious, and I love that she's running on that.
Yeah. I guess here's what I would say is, again, there's a question of tactics and substance. So the student loan debt example is a really important one because this was not a policy that Joe Biden would have, I hope we all agree, probably would not have pursued if he wasn't under pressure in a Democratic primary situation. But he was under pressure, and so he promised a certain policy. Now, that policy, for a variety of reasons, was not able to come into fruition.
Some of it was.
But if he hadn't been forced on the campaign trail to take that position, then I don't think he would have done any of it, because it wasn't so, like, he dragged his feet about it. He wasn't in love with it, but because he had said this, he was under a lot of pressure by activists to get something done during his administration. And they actually have done a significant amount in terms of student loan debt relief.
Yes.
So on the substance, I think it actually is important that we get politicians on the record about promises they're making to the electorate.
Hey guys, this is just a small piece of the debate that Crystal and I had with Hutch and Josiah from Pondering Politics. I guess you could call it the liberal perspective on Kamala's campaign versus the leftist perspective on Kamala's campaign. I'm not sure that's exactly fair, but that's generally the question is about whether or not it made sense for Liz Cheney to be on the campaign trail with Kamala Harris and for Kamala to sort of put the endorsement out there and celebrate it. And we debate that. We debate the general trend of Kamala Harris's campaign. Everybody should definitely sign up on Substack and take a look at the entire conversation. I highly, highly recommend it. This is only a small snippet. You could sign up below.